Welcome to the Candle Business Coach Podcast, a show about the craft of candle making and small business. I'm your host, Kirsty Allen, and I'm a candle maker, mum of three, and kindness advocator. Join me as I dive into all things candles and small business and deliver advice and tips to you in episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Are you on the list to get my daily motivation emails? Every day I'll send you a message that is designed to help keep you focused on taking action toward your goals. Sign up using the link in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by my free ebook, the Candle Business Marketing Kickstarter Kit. Inside this free ebook, you'll learn to identify your blocks of time to dedicate to your candle business. Plus, there are several tips and tricks for re-engaging past customers and attracting new customers into your business so you can grow your business and reach your goals. Check out the link in the show notes for your copy. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend. I hope that you have had a beautiful start to 2023. I know we're about midway through January and it feels like it was Christmas just 2 minutes ago. So I hope that it's been a lovely month for you so far. Now, as candle makers, you know that making candles isn't as simple or straightforward as mixing wax and fragrance oil, right? There's a science to it, and as such, we can come up against some problems with our candles along our journey. In today's episode, I wanted to walk through and talk through a handful of some common candle making issues and troubleshoot them for you so you can take this knowledge and apply it to your next batch of candles. So, first up on the list is frosting. Now, frosting is a byproduct of a natural wax such as soy and is caused by the growth of tiny crystals on the surface of the wax. Did you know there were crystals? I didn't, so it was really interesting to learn that there actually are little crystals on the surfaces of the wax, and that can be on the top or the sides of the candle. Now, it's important to note that all soy wax will frost over time, but luckily it's just an aesthetic issue and doesn't actually affect the way your candle burns or smells. Now, a couple of ways to troubleshoot why your candles might be frosting is that you need to, or one way that you can try is to mix your melted wax less vigorously. So over agitating the wax or stirring it really fast can speed up the crystallization process, which produces that frosting appearance. Another thing you can try is preheating your glassware or your jar. So preheating your glass can help reduce the rate and extent that your candles will frost or may frost. So you can easily preheat your glass in a warm oven on the lowest setting, and be sure to not heat your containers over 37 degrees Celsius because you don't want them to crack or explode in the oven. And make sure that when you're handling the jars that you're using appropriate hand protection such as oven mitts or tea towels. Another thing you can try is pouring your wax at a lower temperature. So this can help reduce the crystal formations that form when the wax hardens, and you can begin adjusting your pour temperature in increments of say 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Another way that you can prevent that frosting from happening is to make sure that your candles cool at room temperature. Around 21 to 24 degrees Celsius is ideal, and you want to make sure it's in a space that is free from any drafts. So placing your candles on a wire cooling rack can also help with the candle cooling evenly and avoids additional heat transfer that can occur if the candles cool on a solid counter or tabletop. So those are just a couple of ways that you can help avoid frosting. But as I said earlier, it is just an aesthetic issue. It won't actually affect the way your candle burns or smells. Next on the list is wet spots. So what can appear to be wet spots on the side of your candles are not really wet spots, but rather places the wax is pulled away from the container as it cools. Now this is most noticeable in glass containers as opposed to opaque or black. So the cleared glass jars are the ones where you'll see these wet spots on the jar. And you'll see that most of the wax is adhered beautifully to the side of the jar, and there's just these spots that can appear when the wax is set. So to help avoid the wet spots in your next batch of candles, let's look at some ways that you can help alleviate this issue from occurring in the first place. So it's always good practice to wash your containers or glasses either with mild soapy water and dry them thoroughly, or use alcohol spray or alcohol rub and a clean cotton pad that doesn't leave any fibers behind, because you want there to be a completely clean surface on the inside of the jar when you pour your wax inside. Another way that you can help prevent the wet spots is to warm your jar. Like I said with the frosting, warming the jar can also help prevent the wax from pulling away as it cools more slowly, which is really cool. You can also pour the wax slowly into the containers, and this minimizes the chance of additional air getting added to the wax and impeding an even rate of cooling, which is really important. It's also helpful to tap the sides of your containers gently right after you've poured the wax to release any air bubbles, or tapping the jar on top of the bench a couple of times, but again, gently. The next tip for avoiding wet spots is to space your candles out to help them cool slowly and evenly. So when the candles have been poured and they're cooling so that they're sitting and setting, you want to space them about 4 or more inches apart. Glass containers, when they're placed right next to each other, will hold heat on the sides, and this can cause those sides to cool more slowly than the rest of the jar. Allowing enough airflow around your candles as they cool will encourage that even rate of cooling, which is what we want. And again, you can also set your candles on a wire cooling rack rather than on the counter. Another important thing to note is, depending on what sort of surface you're working with, so whether it's granite or marble or stone, or if it's just timber, that will also depend on how the candle cools as well. So that's why it's really useful to use that wire cooling rack, and then the air can circulate around the candles and help them cool a bit more evenly, which is what we're after. The next issue that I wanted to talk you through is cracking. So when you see on the top part of the jar after the wax has set, you'll see these tiny hairline fractions almost. Sometimes they're close to the wick and sometimes they're close to the side of the jar. Now this is caused by the combination of the wax shrinking as it cools and tiny air bubbles stuck in the bottom of the container. After the wax hardens, it sinks a bit where the air bubble left a void. Now, most people won't notice it, and it definitely does not affect the burn of the candle, but you can always grab a heat gun and just quickly go over the top just to melt that top part of the wax, and then as it sets, it'll avoid that cracking being on top of the container, or on top of the candle. Another way that you can help alleviate that is to gently tap the container, and you will see that the ways to troubleshoot most of the issues that we have with candles are quite similar. So whether you're having issues from wet spots or frosting, or in this case, we're talking through the cracking on the top of the candles, you'll find that when you use a warm vessel, tapping the container and elevating on that wire cooling rack, all these ways can help avoid a lot of issues. So it can just be a good idea to bring these methods into your usual practice when you're making candles, rather than coming up against the same issues over and over. So as I said, you can gently tap the container, you can elevate it, and that will help alleviate the cooling the uneven cooling in the candle. But you can also adjust your pour temperature. And this is where testing is so important, and you'll find that when you do crack the candle code and you're able to make the perfect, or your version of the perfect candle, you want to know how you did it and all the steps involved. And that's why testing and taking notes is super, super important, so that you can replicate and make big batches of candles, saving you time overall. So you can adjust your pour temperature by, say, plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius. And then when you find the right temperature, that will help your candles cool more evenly, reducing the likelihood of imperfections, which is again what we want to avoid. You can also, instead of using a heat gun, you can pour additional hot wax over the top. I personally don't do this because I feel that especially when it's a clear glass jar, you don't want there to be a distinction between the first lot of pour that's set and then the second layer. I prefer to use a heat gun that you just go over a couple of times. But again, it's up to you, and it's worth just testing out a few things. But again, I wouldn't pour more hot wax over with the fragrance oil added, because you've got such a small amount that you're adding to the jar, and to work out the calculations of the wax and the fragrance oil for one small candle, it's just more trouble than it's worth. So I would get a heat gun if you haven't already got one. Now the next one is something that all soy wax candle makers, or coconut soy wax candle makers, will be very familiar with, and that it's That's when, after the candle has burnt, you've blown out the wick and it's reset, and it's really rough. It's got a few holes, it's got pitted tops. It looks really rough and it just doesn't look perfect. Now, the rough bumpy tops after burning a soy wax candle are caused when the hot wax in the melt pool cools and solidifies at an inconsistent rate. Now, this is a feature of soy wax and is not a sign that you did anything incorrectly. The downside, other than it looking unattractive to us as candle makers, is that the customer can also be put off by the appearance. That said though, this is a perfect way to showcase that you've made a candle with all natural wax rather than using, say, paraffin or a paraffin blend. As I said before, it doesn't affect the performance of the candle. It's just an aesthetic issue that some people can have. But if you're able to get over the look of the candle and just focus on the hot throw when the candle is burning, and it'll still emit a great cold throw as well once it's set, then it really isn't an issue. It's more just comes down to personal preference on how a candle should or should not look when it's not lit. The next issue that I wanted to talk through is when the candle sweats, or also known as leaching, when the fragrance leaches out of the candle and it looks like little sweat beads on top of the candle. This could happen when you attend a market and you forget to pack your marquee and it's a really hot day and all of your candles sweat. Oh, that hasn't happened to you? Oh, I guess that's just me then. Now, this can happen for a variety of reasons, and you'll begin to learn more about the process of making candles the further along in your journey you go. So if in the days after your candle has cooled, if you notice that there is a significant amount of liquid on the surface of your candle, so lots of sweat spots, lots of leaching on top, or lots of seeping on top of the candle, it's usually caused by adding too much fragrance oil or by adding the fragrance at a temperature that is too cool and the wax and the fragrance oil hasn't blended or binded sufficiently. Now, appropriate temperatures and fragrance loads ensure that the fragrance binds completely with the wax, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure we're mixing the wax and the fragrance oil enough and at the right temperature so they bind together, so that when you burn your candle, when you light the wick, it emits that hot throw at the perfect amount and it looks beautiful as well. But if the fragrance does not bind properly, the fragrance will start to separate from the wax and rise to the surface of the candle, or in some cases it'll settle at the bottom of the candle. Now, this can be an issue for a variety of reasons. One, if you've got a clear glass jar, you'll see the fragrance pool in at the bottom or on the top if it's any jar. But the other thing is that when you light the candle, the hot throw won't be at its optimum amount or rate because it hasn't binded with the bounded. I'll have to Google how to say that properly, but you know what I mean. So the way to troubleshoot that is to make sure that you're stirring your fragrance oil in the wax for about 2 minutes. Now, that might seem like a really long time to stir, and I know that there are lots of opinions on whether it's 2 minutes or 1 minute or 5 minutes or 20 seconds or until the wax has cooled to a certain temperature. And this, again, is where testing and taking notes is really important, because you'll need to try a few different ways to see what works for you with the wax that you're using and the fragrance oil that you're using. And that will depend on the different fragrance oils you use. You can't just assume that you've got, say 5 different fragrance oils that they're all going to perform and behave the same way. They usually don't, and that's why you need to test the different fragrance oils when you're making your candles. But I've gone on a bit of a tangent, so to bring this caravan back around, truck. I don't know what the right sayings are tonight. Anyway, so another way, rather than stirring gently for 2 minutes, which I still recommend you try, is to adjust your fragrance load. So more fragrance oil does not necessarily result in a stronger scent. I don't think I've mentioned that before on the podcast, but I know that I've mentioned it on my Instagram at Candle Business Coach, by the way. If you want to come follow me or send me a DM, I'd love to have a chat. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. Usually you need to add, between 6 and 10% per fragrance oil, depending on what wax you use and how strong the scent is. So you'll find as you're making candles that all waxes have a maximum fragrance load. And it's very rare that using the maximum fragrance load is necessary. The vast majority of high quality fragrance oils will be quite strong at 6 to 8%, and I definitely don't recommend using more than 10%. Even if your wax states it can hold more, it's better to try a lower fragrance load first and work your way up, rather than essentially wasting fragrance oil and then having it leach out the top, which then you've got a candle that won't smell as it should. It doesn't look pretty, and you've wasted more fragrance oil, which is usually the most expensive part of making candles, or the most expensive material as you go through and buy all the supplies. You'll see that and wax and fragrance oil, two main components of candle making. They can be the most expensive, so it's best to do a little bit of research, listen to this podcast, get some tips along the way, and learn along your journey. When you start your candle business, there are so many things to consider and research along the way, especially when it comes to choosing the right suppliers. Long Story Short provides all your design and printing needs, from your logo and branding to designing and printing your product labels. The quality is exceptional, the customer service is amazing, and prices are very reasonable. They are the only label company I recommend, so check out their website or send them an email today to get started. hello@longstoryshortdesign.com.au. The next issue that I wanted to talk through that can frustrate and leave us scratching our head as to why it's happening is when there is sooting and large flames. So while you're burning a candle, you may notice smoke coming from the flame. Now this is normal. Anything that burns will produce smoke, but a well-made candle will not produce excessive visible smoke. So if you see a large amount of smoke coming from the flame, that's a sign that you need to adjust your process or your supplies. So supplies, you might be using a wick or a wick series that is not right for your vessel. So while some smoke is expected, excess smoke is a sign that you might be using the wrong wick size. If you see a thick, constant stream of smoke coming from the flame, or large puffs of smoke, or smoke that streams up from the wick continuously, or your container is collecting a dark film, like a black film around the rim of your container, these are all classic signs that you need to size down or wick down on your actual wick. So you want to make sure that you're double checking that you're using the right wick in the recommended series as well. So there are so many different types of wicks. And I'm just referring just to cotton wicks here, but there are a lot of wood wick types as well. So what I recommend is when you buy your wax, look at buying wicks from the same supplier. If they've got a variety of wick sizes, wick series, like your HTP or your CDN or your PTs, it's really important, and it doesn't take much effort. Call the supplier, send them an email. I know you're keen to add everything to cart and purchase, but if you can get some advice from the supplier as to which wick they recommend for the vessel that you are using, that can save you a lot of time in the testing phase as well. Another way that you can help reduce the excess smoke and the sooting is to decrease your fragrance load. So if your fragrance load is too high, the flame can burn off the excess oil that was not able to bind with the wax. This creates a heavier than usual dark smoke. Again, I'll say it, the maximum fragrance load is rarely needed. Most fragrances will be strong enough at 6 to 8% and definitely don't use more than 10%. Again, this comes down to personal opinion and also my personal experience and professional experience of making candles. If you go into the Facebook groups and ask how to troubleshoot these issues that I'm talking about, you'll most likely get different responses. And that's great. It means that you can try something new, something different if what you're trying doesn't work. But just bear in mind that there are a lot of different ways that you can troubleshoot. I'm just going through what are the most common ways of troubleshooting these candle issues. All right, the next one. This is going to be something that many people outside of the candle world don't realize that this is an issue that they're causing themselves most of the time. Now, this can be a wick issue, and I'm referring to tunneling here, but sometimes it can be that you've got a candle that needs that 2 to 4 hours to get the full melt pool, and your customers are only burning for, say, half an hour or an hour, or just not enough time to set the full memory of the candle. Now, if you've done all your testing properly, you know you're using the right wick, the right fragrance load, not the right wax, but the wax that you've chosen, and you've got your vessel, and you know that if you burn it for that 2 to 4 hours, you will get the full melt pool, then it comes down to educating your customers. And this is something that you can do through your Instagram or your Facebook or through your emails to your list as well, is educating your customers on how to burn their candles correctly. And that means making sure that they are lighting the candle with with a lighter, with a match, doesn't matter, but they're lighting the candle and then they're letting that full melt pool occur before they blow out the flame. If you've done your testing, or if during the testing you're getting that tunneling and you're finding that you need to change your wick size, that can usually be the first indicator that your wick is too small. So if the wick is too small, it can't efficiently burn off all the fuel, which is the wax and the fragrance, and it can't generate enough heat to form that great melt pool that we're looking for. So looking at the same series of wick, you then want to go up by one size. Now again, when you get your supplies from your supplier, you should get either a written list or something on the website to show which wick series are best with which wax. Say that 5 times really fast. But sometimes the supplier's recommendations aren't always, they're not always right for the candle that you're creating, depending on if you're using a different wax or different sized vessels. So you can usually increase your wick size. That will help to reduce the tunneling from happening. Oh, and I will mention, I'll just explain what tunneling is for those that are thinking, I don't understand what that is. Tunneling occurs when a candle wick consumes too much fuel too quickly. So that, again, the fuel is the wax and the fragrance. And instead of slowly forming a wide melt pool that extends to the edges of the container, a narrow melt pool forms in the center and burns down rather than out. And that leaves a large amount of wax on the sides of the container. And there are a few ways that you can rescue a candle that is tunneled, but I'll leave that for another podcast episode. So what you can find also is if the wick size is too large and you're getting that sooting and that excess smoke, sometimes that can cause tunneling as well, but that's more of a less common occurrence. And it's often a harder form of tunneling to recognize. So if you've tried going up a wick size and the melt pool gets smaller, try sizing down instead. Again, there are so many different ways to troubleshoot and sort through common and not so common candle issues, but yeah, hopefully this episode is helping with a few of these issues. Another common issue is when the wick mushrooms. And you're probably thinking, if you don't know what that means, you're probably thinking, there's a mushroom on my candle, there's a mushroom on my wick. Kind of. When the candle wick, as it burns down, the mushroom shape is sometimes seen at the end of a candle wick after burning is the result of carbon buildup. So this happens when the flame consumes more fuel, and again, that's wax and fragrance, and actually candle dye if you color your candles. So this happens when the flame consumes more fuel than it can burn. It is a common occurrence, but there are a few things that you can do to help manage it. So use less fragrance oil and or dye if you're coloring your candles. Less fragrance and dye helps ensure that the flame of your candle properly consumes all the material flowing up through the wick. So that's the fragrance oil and the wax. Remember, you don't necessarily need to use the maximum fragrance load to achieve a strong scent throw. And in doing that, you might even have the opposite effect and hinder your hot throw rather than boost it. So that's a good point to note. Another thing is you need to trim your wick between burning. So some wick series are actually more prone to mushrooming than others. So be sure to trim your wick to about 1/4 inch each time you burn the candle. And again, this comes down to educating your customers and letting them know that, they don't have to necessarily buy a wick trimmer. If you stock them, great, promote them. If you don't stock them and you don't plan to, just let them know they can grab a clean tissue that they put between their fingers and they pull the top part of the wick off. Now, even if you've got a perfect candle, it's still very great practice to remove the top part of the wick so that you've just got that 1/4 inch from the top of the wax, the 1/4 inch of the wick sticking out the top after it's had a burn or two. Another way to reduce the mushroom, I can't say it. Another way that you can reduce the mushrooming is to size down your wick. So if you have a very deep melt pool, which is more than half an inch in 30 minutes, or you see excess smoke or soot built up on the container, it's best to try going down a size in the same wick series. And the last common candle issue that can occur is sinkholes. Oh, sinkholes, the bane of my existence. Air can become trapped in soy wax during the candle making process. So when you melt your wax at home or in the office, you might occasionally spot or hear some of that air escaping. Now, what can happen is that this trapped air ends up in your poured candle. And while the wax cools and sets, the air works its way to the top and is released. However, if the surface of the candle sets before all the air has time to release, it gets trapped in the candle. And as the wax sets, the air pocket leaves a void in the candle and the surface above will collapse basically. Sometimes these sinkholes can be very small and sometimes they can be an inch deep into the candle, which is quite large. So there's a few ways that you can rectify or rescue a candle if it's got sinkholes. And then there are a couple of ways that you can reduce the likelihood of it occurring in the first place. So one way to rectify is to again use your heat gun just over the top and the wax will pool into that sinkhole, filling it up, and then you'll be able to let the candle set. Or you can again pour additional melted wax over the top to fill in the hole. Again, I don't recommend doing that, but give it a go, see if you like it, if you like that method. Now, a way to prevent the sinkholes occurring in the first place is once you've poured your wax and it's sitting in the jar, you can get a skewer or a chopstick or a knife and stab the candle basically in and around the wick in a few places just to let the wax pool into those areas, and that will hopefully avoid any of those air bubbles getting trapped under the surface of the wax. Another thing that's important is when you're melting your wax before you've added when you add the fragrance oil and you're stirring it, make sure you're not stirring too vigorously because that can actually trap air bubbles in that wax and fragrance oil mixture. And then when you pour the candle, those air bubbles can be trapped in the vessel, which is not what we want. So after you've poured the wax into the vessel, you want to carefully tap the container on your bench to release any of that trapped air. So there you go. There's a few issues or a few common hurdles that we can have when we're making candles. I know that for me, I've definitely experienced quite a few of those, and it takes that testing and that troubleshooting and that time and that patience most of all to be able to, I guess, work out what the issues are and then try to avoid them for the next batch of candles. And it can be really disheartening when you do all of the right things. You know, you're pouring the fragrance oil in at the right temperature, you're melting the wax to the right temperature, you're stirring gently, you're letting the candles cool on a wire rack, then they're spaced apart. You can do all the right things and still have issues with your candles. And I just want to remind you that that is completely normal. Not every candle you make will be your version of perfect, but the idea is that the more we practice the craft of candle making, the better we get at it. And I love that as we progress through the journey of candle making as candle makers, we do get better. And if you're willing to give it your all, give it a crack, give it a go, and just keep trying, the candles you produce will get better and better and better. No one is born with the ability to make perfect candles, and I would argue against that perfection is overrated anyway. But if you're making the best possible candles that you can, you need to be proud of yourself. A lot of time, effort, energy, and money goes into this beautiful craft that we call candle making, and it's worth celebrating the small wins along the way. So if you've had experience with frosting or sinkholes or wet spots, and then you work through how to resolve those issues, and then you don't have those hurdles to overcome anymore, be proud of yourself. You know, write it down in your journal and say, hey, I made a batch of candles and it worked and there were no issues this time. And I took all the notes that I needed to during that testing and I can replicate it again and again and again. And you'll be surprised at how incredible how incredibly confident you become, not only in your business, but in your personal life as well. Our professional and our personal growth are interchangeable, and there are so many ways that we can grow in our business through the different tasks that we complete, the different responsibilities that require our attention. But the way that we grow both personally and professionally, I feel, is truly inspiring. And I love that we're able to express our creativity whilst we're having fun and feeling in flow. So there you go. There's some words of wisdom for you on this beautiful Tuesday. Although technically it's the night before again that I'm recording. Yes, I know I need to be more prepared. Oh wait, no, it's not Monday, it's Sunday. Yay, I'm a day ahead. Oh, that's so good. I totally forgot what day it was. Yes, so there are some words of wisdom and some inspiration for you when you listen to this, no matter what day of the week it is. And send me a DM on Instagram if you have any other issues that you're having with your candles and just need a little bit of advice or support walking through the process. I'm more than happy to assist. My handle is @candlebusinesscoach. So yeah, I hope you have a beautiful rest of the week, and I will talk to you very soon. Thanks everyone for listening today. I hope this episode added value to your candle making journey. Check out the show notes for all the links mentioned throughout today's show, and please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks again for listening. Have a beautiful day.